I never imagined I'd feel satisfaction watching my father-in-law's face as he learned the true value of my foolish little hobby. The same man who had openly mocked my investment at family dinners for years now stood speechless in my office, overlooking the San Francisco skyline, staring at the valuation report that put my company's worth at $70 million. Life truly has a strange way of coming full circle. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Alexandra Chen, and I'm currently the CEO and majority shareholder of Neurotech Innovations, a company that's revolutionizing the way artificial intelligence interfaces with healthcare systems. But 5 years ago, I was just Richard Harmon's disappointing daughter-in-law, the woman who wasted her engineering degree on a pipe dream instead of taking the safe corporate job he'd arranged at his friend's manufacturing firm. The day everything changed wasn't marked by shouting or drama. It unfolded with the casual cruelty of privileged certainty at the Harmon family's Thanksgiving dinner in their Westchester estate. The excessive formality of these gatherings always made me uncomfortable. Crystal glasses that rang too loudly. When touched, silverware heavy enough to feel like weapons, and conversation designed to showcase success rather than connection. I was helping my mother-in-law, Diane, arrange dessert plates in the kitchen when Richard's booming voice carried from the dining room. "So Alexandra's still playing with her computer program instead of getting a real job? How do you afford that boat you just bought, Michael? Supporting two-on-one income isn't what I'd call smart financial planning." My husband Michael's response was too quiet to hear, but Richard's dismissive laughter told me everything I needed to know about how the conversation was going. I stood frozen, the delicate china dessert plate trembling slightly in my hand. Diane patted my arm awkwardly. "Don't mind him, dear. He just doesn't understand these new technology things. In his day, investments meant real estate and the stock market." The pity in her eyes stung worse than Richard's mockery. I'd been working 18-hour days for 2 years developing my neural network algorithm designed to predict disease progression patterns and optimize treatment protocols. I'd poured my savings, my time, and my heart into this project, surviving on ramen noodles and determination while coding in our tiny apartment's second bedroom. When I walked back into the dining room balancing 3 plates of pumpkin pie, Richard was holding court, explaining to Michael's younger sister Emily and her new husband how venture capital was a fool's game these days. 95% of startups fail, he pronounced, with the certainty of someone repeating a statistic without understanding its nuance, especially these apps, things everyone thinks will make them rich. Remember Alexandra's college roommate with that food delivery service? Bankrupt in 8 months. I placed the dessert plates down carefully, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. "Neurotech isn't an app, Richard. We're developing a proprietary algorithm that—" Yes, he waved his hand dismissively, cutting me off mid-sentence. "The computer thing that's going to revolutionize healthcare. Meanwhile, Johnson at Precision Manufacturing is still holding that operations director position for you. Real work, real salary, real benefits." He turned to Michael. "Some stability would serve you both well, especially if you're thinking about starting a family soon." The mention of family was a deliberate barb. Richard knew we'd been trying unsuccessfully for a year, and the implication that my career choices were somehow to blame sent a shock of anger through me. "My algorithm is showing promising results," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I've been invited to present at the Biotech Innovation Summit next month, and there's already interest from several hospital research departments." Richard took a large bite of pie, chewing deliberately before responding. "Presentations don't pay mortgages, Alexandra. This little hobby of yours has gone on long enough, don't you think? Time to join the real world." I felt Michael's hand squeeze my knee under the table, our silent signal that I should let it go. We'd had this conversation countless times, in private. Was it worth continuing to self-fund my research when we were burning through savings? Should I take the corporate job, Work on my algorithm nights and weekends? Was I being selfish pursuing this dream? The real world is changing, Dad, Michael said, surprising me with his direct challenge. What Alexandra's working on could transform patient outcomes. The potential impact is worth the risk. Richard's expression hardened. Impact doesn't build retirement accounts. When I was your age, I was already managing 50 employees and had investment properties generating passive income. What do you have to show for yourselves? A rented apartment? And a dream? He reached for his wallet, removed a check, and slid it across the table. Early Christmas gift. Put it toward a down payment on something sensible. The check was for $50,000, a generous gift by any standard. But the way it was presented made it feel like a judgment on our life choices and capabilities. Michael started to reach for it, but I placed my hand over his. Thank you, but we can't accept this, I said quietly. The table fell silent. In the Harmon family, refusing financial gifts was unheard of. Money was Richard's love language, and his primary tool of control. Don't be ridiculous, Richard scoffed. Pride doesn't pay bills. It's not about pride, I replied, finding unexpected strength in my voice. It's about believing in what I'm building. I don't need charity. I need people to understand that what looks like a hobby to you represents the future of personalized medicine. Richard's face flushed. You think some algorithm is going to outperform doctors with decades of experience? This fantasy world you're living in? It's not fantasy, I interrupted, standing up from the table. My neural network just achieved an 87% accuracy rate in predicting treatment responses for complex autoimmune conditions. That's 23% higher than current clinical methods. I took a deep breath. But you've never once asked me to explain how it works or why it matters. Emily looked between us nervously while her husband suddenly became fascinated with his dessert. Diane placed a hand on Richard's arm, a silent plea to de-escalate. Alexandra, Richard's voice had that dangerous calm I'd come to recognize. You've clearly made your choice. But choices have consequences. Don't come looking for help when this tech bubble you're chasing finally bursts. I nodded, suddenly feeling a strange sense of clarity. That's fair. Judge me by my results. On the drive home, Michael was unusually quiet. When we finally pulled into our apartment complex, he turned to me. You know he's just worried about us, right? In his own controlling, insufferable way. Is that a worry? I asked. Or is it the need to be right, to have everyone follow his approved life script? Michael sighed. Probably both. But was refusing the check the right move? We could use that money, Alex. If not for a down payment, then for your research. I stared out at the rain beginning to streak the windshield. Taking that money would have meant accepting his narrative, that what I'm building is just a hobby, that I need rescuing. I turned to face my husband. Do you still believe in what we're doing? He was quiet for a long moment. I believe in you. I always have. But I'm scared, Alex. We have 6 months of savings left, Max. Then give me 6 months, I said. If I can't secure funding or show significant progress by then, I'll take the job at Precision. We sealed the deal with a kiss, but as we climbed the stairs to our apartment, the weight of what I'd promised settled heavily on my shoulders. 6 months to prove Richard wrong. 6 months to validate years of work. 6 months to secure our future. What I didn't know then was that those 6 months would completely transform our lives, just not in any way I could have possibly imagined. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The morning after that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner, I woke before sunrise, my mind racing with doubt and determination in equal measure. Michael was still asleep, his breathing deep and even beside me. I slipped out of bed, made coffee, and retreated to my makeshift home office, a converted walk-in closet with a desk wedged between plastic storage bins of seasonal clothes. As my ancient laptop whirred to life, I opened my email, heart sinking at the new message from Dr. Eliza Warren, research director at Memorial University Hospital. I'd sent her my preliminary findings 2 weeks earlier, hoping for validation from someone in the medical establishment. Subject: Neurotech algorithmic results. Follow-up, dear Ms. Chen. While your results are intriguing, our department cannot allocate resources to external collaborations at this time. The methodology requires significant clinical validation that would strain our already limited research budget. I wish you success in your endeavors. Regards, Dr. Eliza Warren. Another rejection. I'd received 17 similar responses in the past month alone, each one polite, each one dismissive in its own way. I closed my eyes, Richard's words echoing in my head. 95% of startups fail. Was I being stubborn or visionary? The line between the two often felt razor thin. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Biotech Summit presentation. 3 weeks. The conference that had seemed like such a promising opportunity now loomed like a final exam I wasn't prepared for. If I couldn't convince a single hospital research department to take my algorithm seriously, how could I impress a room full of industry veterans and potential investors? I opened my project files and began methodically reviewing my latest test results. The neural network was performing exceptionally well with historical data, predicting treatment outcomes for complex cases with accuracy that surpassed traditional clinical methods. But without access to live patient data and clinical validation, I remained stuck in what investors called the valley of death, that painful gap between promising technology and proven market application. "Hey!" Michael's voice came from the doorway, startling me. "You're up early." I tried to smile. Thought I'd get a head start. He studied my face, reading the disappointment I was trying to hide. "Another rejection?" I nodded, gesturing toward my screen. Memorial Pass, too. "Same story. Interesting concept. No resources. Best of luck elsewhere." I ran my hands through my uncombed hair. "Maybe your dad is right. Maybe this is just a fantasy." Michael knelt beside my chair, turning me to face him. "Listen to me. My father has been right about exactly one thing in his life: marrying my mother. Everything else is just luck and privilege that he mistakes for wisdom." He squeezed my hands. "You're brilliant, Alex. Your algorithm works. We just need to find the right people who can see what you've built." His faith in me was both comforting and terrifying. What if I couldn't live up to it? "I've been thinking," he continued, "about what you said last night. 6 months. I'm all in, but we need a strategy. The Biotech Summit is our best shot at getting in front of people who matter." "I know, but my presentation isn't ready, and I still don't have clinical validation data. Without that, I'm just another theorist with promising lab results." Michael's expression shifted to one I recognized. The same look he got when strategizing. Complex legal cases for his small practice. "What if we approach this differently? Instead of trying to convince hospitals to test your algorithm, what if we find individual doctors willing to review real cases against your predictions? That would require patient data, which no one will share without IRB approval and formal research protocols," I countered. "Not necessarily," Michael said slowly. "What about Dr. Patel?" Dr. Lakshmi Patel was a specialist who had treated my autoimmune condition 3 years earlier. Unlike many physicians I'd encountered, she had been genuinely interested in my background in AI and biomedical engineering. "She's bound by the same privacy regulations as everyone else," I pointed out. "Yes, but she could present anonymized historical cases, ones already resolved, and see how your algorithm would have predicted the outcomes. That's not a clinical trial. It's retrospective validation." I considered this, hope flickering. It might work, assuming she's willing to take the time. Only one way to find out. Michael stood up, suddenly energized. And while you work on that angle, I have an idea for the presentation. The next day, I sent Dr. Patel a carefully worded email explaining my research and Michael's suggested approach. To my surprise, she responded within hours, requesting a video call that same evening. "Alexandra," she greeted me, her kind face serious on my laptop screen. "Your email comes at an interesting time. I've just returned from a conference on precision medicine where the limitations of current predictive models were a major topic. My pulse quickened. That's exactly what neurotech addresses. Traditional models use linear relationships, but my algorithm incorporates complex interconnected variables and learns from outcomes in ways that mimic neurological processes." She nodded. "I understand the concept, but I need to see it demonstrated. I have a proposition for you." Dr. Patel explained that she had a database of 200 anonymized patient cases from her practice, all with known treatments and outcomes. She would provide me with the initial data points, but withhold the treatment, decisions, and results. If your algorithm can predict what actually happened with meaningful accuracy, we can move to the next phase. I have colleagues who would be interested in this validation exercise, assuming it shows promise. I fought to keep my voice steady. "When can we start?" "I'll send 50 cases tomorrow. You'll have 1 week." After we ended the call, I let out a shout that brought Michael running. "Dr. Patel is going to test the algorithm." I grabbed his hands, pulling him into an impromptu dance around our tiny apartment. "She has anonymized cases, real-world data. That's amazing." Michael spun me in a circle. "I told you we just needed to find the right person." For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. This was exactly what I needed. A chance to prove the algorithm's capabilities with real patient data. But reality quickly tempered my excitement. I now had 1 week to refine my model for this crucial test, plus prepare for the Biotech Summit presentation. Success with Dr. Patel might open doors, but failure would only reinforce every doubt Richard had planted. "I need to optimize the interface," I said, already mentally cataloging the improvements required. "And clean up the data pre-processing modules. And revise the visualization outputs to make the predictions more intuitive for clinicians." Michael placed his hands on my shoulders. "One step at a time. This is what you've been working toward. For 2 years. You're ready." I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I was certain of one thing. This was my chance to transform neurotech from a foolish hobby into the healthcare revolution I knew it could be. The next 7 days would determine whether my algorithm deserved a place in modern medicine or would join the scrap heap of promising technologies that never found their path to implementation. What I couldn't have known then was that these 50 cases from Dr. Patel would set in motion a chain of events that would not only validate my work, but catapult neurotech beyond my wildest expectations, and ultimately lead to that moment years later when Richard Harmon would stand speechless in my office, faced with irrefutable proof of how wrong he had been. The next 7 days were a blur of code, coffee, and very little sleep. Dr. Patel delivered the promised 50 anonymized patient files, each containing detailed medical histories, lab results, and initial presentations, but with treatments and outcomes removed. The challenge was clear: predict what happened to these real patients using only my algorithm. I converted our small dining table into Command Central, covering it with sticky notes and notebooks while my laptop ran simulations day and night. The processor fan's constant whirring became the soundtrack of our apartment. Michael took over cooking, cleaning, and fielding calls from his clients so I could focus entirely on the task. "You need to eat something," he insisted on the 3rd evening, placing a plate of pasta beside my keyboard. I barely looked up. "In a minute. I think I've isolated the issue with the medication interaction module." "That's what you said 2 hours. Ego about a different module," he pointed out. "The food's getting cold, and your brain needs fuel." He was right, of course. I'd been making careless errors that morning, transposing numbers, forgetting variable names I'd used 100 times before. signs of exhaustion that I couldn't afford. I forced myself to take a break, stretching arms that felt leaden from typing. I keep thinking about what happens if this doesn't work, if the algorithm's predictions don't match the real outcomes. Michael sat across from me, pushing the plate closer. Then you'll learn why and make it better. That's science, right? His simplification of my dilemma made me smile despite my anxiety. It's not just about science anymore. Dr. Patel is putting her professional reputation on the line by giving me this chance. If I fail, she looks foolish for believing in me. So don't fail, Michael said with a shrug. But also, don't break yourself trying to be perfect. Dr. Patel is a scientist too. She understands iteration. I took a bite of pasta, surprised by how hungry I actually was. When did you get so wise about my field? I've been living with a brilliant engineer for 5 years. Some of it was bound to rub off. He grinned. Besides, I've been reading up. If I'm going to help you pitch this at the Biotech Summit, I need to understand what we're selling. I nearly choked on my food. You're coming to the summit? Took 3 days off work. Already cleared it with Patterson. Michael's boss at the small legal firm where he handled environmental cases was notoriously stingy with time off. This is too important for you to do alone. The gesture touched me deeply. While I'd been losing myself in algorithms, Michael had been silently arranging his schedule, studying my research, and keeping our life running. He believed in neurotech so completely that he was willing to risk his own professional standing. Thanks you, I said, reaching for his hand. I don't think I could do this without you. You absolutely could, he corrected me, but you don't have to. Fortified by food and Michael's unwavering support, I returned to work with renewed focus. The algorithm needed refinement in how it weighted comorbidities against age factors, and the visualization interface required simplification for clinical interpretation. I worked through the night, fueled by determination and the dwindling countdown of days. On day 5, disaster struck. I was running the final batch of predictions when my laptop screen froze, followed by the distinctive click of a hard drive. Failure. Years of research, months of coding, and the half-completed predictions for Dr. Patel, all potentially lost in an instant. No, I muttered, frantically trying recovery procedures. Nothing worked. The machine was dead. Michael found me sitting on the floor, the useless laptop on my knees, tears streaming down my face. It's gone, I whispered. Everything's gone. He knelt beside me. What about your cloud backups? The algorithm is backed up, but the patient data processing was only local. Dr. Patel's deadline is in 2 days, and I've only completed 23 predictions. I can't start over now. Michael took the laptop from me. Let me call Raj. Raj Mehta was Michael's college roommate, who now ran a computer repair shop in Brooklyn. He specialized in data recovery, cases that other technicians deemed hopeless. It's almost midnight, I protested. Raj doesn't sleep normal hours, Michael said, already dialing. And he owes me for getting him out of that copyright infringement situation last year. An hour later, we were in Raj's cluttered shop, watching, anxiously as he connected my laptop's hard drive to specialized equipment. Physical damage to the read-write head, he diagnosed, peering at the disassembled drive. But the platters look intact. He glanced up at my distraught expression. That's good news, Alex. The data's probably still there. Probably isn't definitely, I said, unable to hide my desperation. I need those files, Raj. Years of work are on that drive. Give me 24 hours, he promised. If the data exists, I'll find it. We left the shop at 2 a.m., returning to an apartment that felt eerily quiet without the constant hum of my working laptop. I lay awake beside Michael, staring at the ceiling, mentally calculating and recalculating timelines. Best case scenario. Raj recovered everything tomorrow afternoon. I would have roughly 36 hours to complete the remaining predictions before Dr. Patel's deadline. Possible, but barely. Worst case, the data was truly gone. I'd have to admit defeat to Dr. Patel, withdraw from the biotech summit, and face the reality that Richard had been right all along. That thought kept me awake until dawn. The next day crawled agonizingly slowly. I tried working on my summit presentation using Michael's laptop, but my mind kept drifting to the data recovery effort. Finally, at 4:37 p.m., my phone rang. "I've got most of it," Raj announced without a preamble. "The algorithm files are intact. Patient data processing is about 90% recovered. Some corruption in the temporary files, but the original datasets are clean." I nearly collapsed with relief. "You're a miracle worker." "I accept payment in the form of good whiskey and future legal consultations," he replied cheerfully. "How soon do you need this operation?" "Yesterday." "Come by in an hour. I've installed everything on a loaner machine. It's not fancy, but it'll get you through until you can replace yours." When we arrived, Raj handed me a battered but functional laptop with my recovered work. "The hard drive is already showing signs of imminent failure. You need proper equipment, Alex. This consumer-grade stuff can't handle what you're doing." He was right. I'd been running complex machine learning operations on hardware designed for web browsing and word processing. But proper workstations cost thousands of dollars we didn't have. Back home, I immediately verified the recovery. True to Raj's assessment, most of my work was intact, including the completed predictions and processing pipeline. I could resume where I'd left off, but the borrowed laptop struggled with the computational load. Operations that should have taken minutes stretched to hours. "We need to prioritize," Michael said, watching my frustration mount as the system lagged. "Focus on completing Dr. Patel's cases first. The presentation refinements can wait." I nodded, already adjusting my plan. "I'll run predictions overnight. If the system doesn't crash, I should have results by morning." I set up the processes and stepped away, knowing that hovering wouldn't make the old machine work faster. Michael and I ate takeout in tense silence, both aware of how precarious our situation had become. The hard drive crash had exposed a fundamental vulnerability in my operation. I simply didn't have the infrastructure to do this work professionally. "Whatever happens with Dr. Patel," Michael said as we prepared for bed, "we need to think bigger about Neurotech's future. You can't keep running this on consumer laptops." "I know," I sighed, "but enterprise computing infrastructure costs money we don't have." Michael was quiet for a moment. "There's always my dad's check." I stared at him. "You can't be serious." "It's still sitting in his desk drawer. He mentioned it when he called yesterday." Richard had been calling every few days since Thanksgiving, ostensibly to check in, but really to see if we'd reconsidered his offer. Each time, Michael politely deflected. "Taking his money comes with strings we can't afford," I said firmly. "We'd be buying equipment with our independence." Michael didn't argue, but his expression told me this conversation wasn't over. Morning revealed both good and bad news. The predictions had processed overnight without crashing, but the results were troubling. Several cases showed significant divergence between my algorithm's predictions and what I suspected were the actual clinical outcomes, based on the initial data. Either my model had fundamental flaws, or I was missing key medical insights. With the deadline looming in hours, not days, I faced a critical decision: submit potentially flawed results to Dr. Patel, or ask for more time I wasn't sure she would grant. After an hour of double-checking my work and finding no obvious errors, I made one of the hardest calls of my professional life. Dr. Patel answered on the third ring. "Dr. Patel, it's Alexandra Chen," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm calling about the prediction deadline." "I'm looking forward to reviewing your results," she replied. "That's why I'm calling. I've encountered some complications." I explained the hardware failure and my concerns about the preliminary results showing potential discrepancies. There was a long pause on the line. You're telling me you need more time? I believe some of the predictions may be flawed due to computational constraints, not algorithmic ones. With proper equipment and a few more days, I could deliver more reliable results. Another pause. Alexandra, I arranged for colleagues to review these findings tomorrow, physicians with busy schedules who made time specifically for this. My stomach sank. I understand. However, she continued, I appreciate your honesty. Many researchers would simply submit what they had rather than admit potential flaws. She sighed audibly. I can reschedule for next Friday. That gives you 8 more days. But I need complete results then, no exceptions. Relief washed over me. Thank you, Dr. Patel. I won't disappoint you. After hanging up, I turned to Michael, who had been hovering anxiously nearby. She gave me an extension. 8 days. That's great. His smile faded as he saw my expression. Isn't it? It is, except for one massive problem. I gestured to the struggling borrowed laptop. This machine can't handle the computational load. I need professional-grade equipment to deliver reliable results, and we still don't have the money for it. Michael. Paced our small living room. What about a university computer lab? Don't you still have alumni access at MIT? The remote computing resources are limited for alumni, and I'd need specialized software installation permissions I don't have. I ran my hands through my tangled hair. Even if I could get access, I'd need to sanitize Dr. Patel's patient data to use university resources. The privacy implications alone make it impossible. We spent the evening brainstorming increasingly desperate solutions. Crowdfunding would take too long. Credit cards were already maxed from previous research expenses. Friends with technical resources were either overseas or working at companies with strict security protocols that prevented outside projects. What about Dr. Liu? Michael suggested around midnight, naming one of my former professors. She's at the Broad Institute now, I replied wearily. I could ask, but I doubt she'd remember me. I was just one of hundreds of students. You were her research assistant for a year, Michael reminded me. And she specifically mentioned your exceptional approach to neural network applications in her recommendation letter. He was right. Dr. Liu had been a supportive mentor during my graduate studies. Still, asking for access to high-performance computing resources was a significant favor. I'll email her in the morning, I agreed. But we need backup plans. The next day brought a surprising response from Dr. Liu. She was actually attending the Biotech Summit as a keynote speaker and suggested meeting there to discuss my project. It was promising but not immediate enough for Dr. Patel's deadline. Without options dwindling, I found myself in the uncomfortable position of considering Richard's offer. The $50,000 would more than cover the equipment I needed, with plenty left for operating expenses while I pursued proper funding. It's just money, Michael argued over dinner. Take it as a business loan if that makes it easier. We can draft repayment terms, make it official. You know it's not about the money, I countered. It's about proving I was right to pursue this path instead of the one he chose for me. Taking his money now feels like admitting defeat. Is your pride worth sacrificing this opportunity? Michael asked gently. Dr. Patel won't give you a third chance. The question stung because I knew he was right. My resistance wasn't just about independence, it was also about ego. I wanted to succeed on my own terms, to prove Richard wrong without any assistance from him. But that stubbornness might cost me everything I'd worked for. I'll think about it, I conceded. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed and sat at our kitchen table with my tablet, reviewing the algorithmic issues I'd identified in the problematic predictions. The more I examined them, the more convinced I became that computational limitations, not conceptual flaws, were causing the discrepancies. With proper resources, Neurotech could deliver the accuracy I knew was possible. The decision crystallized. In that pre-dawn quiet, I would swallow my pride. In the light of day, however, I wanted to explore one last alternative. I need you to help me draft a formal proposal, I told Michael over breakfast. Not for Richard, but for Dr. Patel. What kind of proposal? A partnership. If she can provide access to computing resources at the hospital for these predictions, I'll give her research team priority access to the algorithm for future studies. Michael looked skeptical. Do you think she has that kind of authority? She's the research director. If anyone can authorize it, she can. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. It's worth trying before we resort to Richard's money. I spent the morning crafting a detailed proposal, outlining the specific computational needs, security protocols to protect patient data, and the mutual benefits of collaboration. By noon, I had sent it to Dr. Patel with a request for urgent consideration. Her response came faster than expected. She wanted to discuss it in person that afternoon. The meeting was set for 4 p.m. at her office in the hospital's research wing. I arrived early, clutching a folder containing printouts of my preliminary results and additional documentation about the algorithm's security features. Dr. Patel's office was surprisingly modest for someone of her stature. Small, practical, with walls lined with medical journals and a desk covered in organized stacks of research papers. She gestured for me to sit. Your proposal is interesting, she began, getting straight to the point. But using hospital computing resources for an external unvalidated project presents significant hurdles. I understand the concerns, I replied, but the potential benefits— Let me finish, she said, holding up a hand. I've consulted with our IT director and legal team. We can't provide direct access to our systems. My heart sank, but she continued. However, we can offer a different solution. Dr. Patel explained that the hospital had recently established a partnership with a biomedical computing startup called Quantum Health, which provided secure cloud computing specifically designed for healthcare applications. As part of their arrangement, the hospital had dedicated resources they could allocate to promising research projects. I've arranged for your algorithm to have 1 week of access, she said. The computing power is substantial, far beyond what you could achieve with personal equipment. But, her expression grew serious, this means your work will be under institutional scrutiny. If the results aren't compelling, it will reflect poorly on both of us. I swallowed hard. I'm confident in the algorithm, Dr. Patel. Given proper computational resources, it will demonstrate significant predictive value. I hope you're right. She handed me a folder containing login credentials and security protocols. The clock starts tomorrow morning. I expect complete results next Thursday. No exceptions this time. As I left the hospital clutching the folder, I felt a dizzying mixture of relief and terror. I finally had access to the resources I needed. But the stakes had risen dramatically. Dr. Patel had put her professional reputation on the line, and institutional eyes would be watching my every move on their systems. I called Michael from the subway. We got the computing resources, I said when he answered. But there's a catch. My work will be visible to the entire research department. That's good, right? Michael sounded uncertain. More exposure? Only if it works, I replied. If it fails spectacularly and publicly. I took a deep breath. I start tomorrow. 7 days to prove everything. You've got this, Michael said with a confidence I wished I fully shared. Come home and we'll celebrate this win. But as I made my way back to our apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a reckoning. After years of work in isolation, my algorithm would finally face rigorous institutional scrutiny. Everything I'd claimed about its capabilities would be either validated or exposed as wishful thinking. I had 7 days to prove that my hobby could transform healthcare, or confirm that Richard had been right all along. The quantum health computing environment was unlike anything I'd ever worked with. Logging in for the first time from our apartment the next morning, I felt like a kid who had been practicing piano on a toy keyboard suddenly given access to a concert grand. The processing power was staggering. Operations that had taken hours on my laptop completed in seconds. I spent the first day migrating my algorithm and Dr. Patel's patient data to the secure platform, meticulously documenting each step to ensure reproducibility. The system's dashboards showed other researchers actively working on different projects, a reminder that my work was now taking place in a shared professional environment rather than my isolated home setup. By evening, I had the first batch of predictions running. The results started appearing in real time, flowing into my visualization dashboard with a speed that was almost disorienting after years of waiting for my modest hardware to process. "This is incredible," I told Michael as he peered over my shoulder. "Look how the confidence intervals are tightening. The neural network is finding patterns I suspected were there but couldn't computationally verify before." He nodded, though I knew the technical details were mostly lost on him. "So it's working? The algorithm is making accurate predictions?" "It's not just working, it's exceeding my expectations." I pointed to a cluster of data points on the screen. "See these cases? They all have complex immune responses that traditional models struggle to account for. My algorithm is identifying intervention windows that standard protocols might miss." For the first time, I allowed myself to fully believe in what I'd built. This wasn't just a promising idea or an academic exercise. It was a functional tool with real clinical potential. I worked through the night, fueled by excitement and the addictive immediacy of seeing results materialize. By morning, I had completed predictions for all 50 cases, including detailed confidence analyses and visualization outputs designed for clinical interpretation. But the real test would come when these predictions were compared against the actual outcomes that Dr. Patel had withheld. I packaged the results and sent them to her with a detailed methodology document, then collapsed into bed, exhausted but hopeful. The call came sooner than expected. My phone rang at 2:17 p.m., jolting me from sleep. Dr. Patel's name flashed on the screen. "I've reviewed your predictions," she said without preamble when I answered. "Can you come to the hospital? Now." Her tone gave nothing away. "Is there a problem with the results?" I asked, heart pounding. "We need to discuss this in person. How soon can you be here?" "An hour," I promised, already scrambling for clothes. Michael was at work, so I left him a message and rushed to the subway, my mind racing through possibilities. Had I misinterpreted the data, made a computational error? Or worse, had the algorithm simply failed to perform when given proper validation? Dr. Patel was waiting in a small conference room rather than her office. More concerning, she wasn't alone. 3 other physicians sat with her, their expressions unreadable as I entered. "Alexandra," Dr. Patel gestured to an empty chair. "Please join us." I sat, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "I understand you've reviewed my predictions." "We have." She glanced at her colleagues before continuing. "Your algorithm correctly predicted treatment outcomes in 47 of the 50 cases. In the remaining 3, it identified alternative treatment approaches that, in retrospect, might have produced better outcomes than what was actually administered." I blinked, processing her words. "So the predictions were accurate?" "Remarkably so," said the older man to Dr. Patel's right. He introduced himself as Dr. Warren Chen, chair of the hospital's Innovation Committee. Particularly in the complex autoimmune cases where our standard protocols often produce variable results. The confidence intervals were especially compelling. Added a younger woman who introduced herself as Dr. Sophia Kim, a neurologist. "Your model doesn't just make predictions, it quantifies uncertainty in a way that's actually useful for clinical decision-making." I struggled to maintain my professional composure as the significance of their reaction dawned on me. These weren't just polite acknowledgments. They were genuinely impressed. "We'd like to discuss a formal validation study," Dr. Patel said. A properly designed clinical evaluation using a larger dataset and prospective analysis. With IRB approval and potential for publication, Dr. Chen added. If these preliminary results hold up, this could significantly impact treatment planning for complex cases. The fourth physician, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. I'm Dr. James Rivera from Hospital Administration, he said. I need to understand the intellectual property situation here. Who owns this algorithm? I do, I replied, finding my voice. I developed it independently. It's proprietary to my company, Neurotech Innovations. Your company? He raised an eyebrow. Are you incorporated? Who's your legal team? These questions caught me off guard. Neurotech existed as a registered business name, but I had none of the corporate infrastructure he was asking about. In the early stages, I admitted. Currently, I'm the sole proprietor. The physicians exchanged glances. If we're going to pursue a formal study, Dr. Rivera said carefully, we need clearly defined terms for data usage, publication rights, and potential commercialization. Our legal department will require proper corporate documentation. My momentary elation faltered. The technical validation was a tremendous victory, but I was unprepared for these institutional requirements. Neurotech wasn't structured for a formal hospital partnership. Dr. Patel seemed to sense my uncertainty. Alexandra needs time to consult with her advisors, she said. Let's reconvene next week to discuss structural details. For now, I'd like to continue exploring the technical capabilities. After the administrators left, Dr. Patel turned to me. Your algorithm is impressive, but you're clearly unprepared for what comes next. This isn't just about technology anymore. It's about navigating institutional partnerships, regulatory considerations, and potential commercialization. I've been focused on making it work, I admitted. The business aspects were secondary. They can't be secondary anymore. Her tone was kind but firm. If you want this to move beyond a research project, you need proper structure, legal protection, clear ownership documentation, partnership agreements. Do you have anyone advising you on these matters? I thought of Michael, whose legal experience was primarily in environmental cases, not healthcare technology or intellectual property. I'm working on assembling the right team, I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. Dr. Patel nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. The Biotech Summit is next week, correct? There will be people there who can help with these aspects. Use that opportunity wisely. As I left the hospital, my emotions were contradictory. The algorithm had been validated beyond my expectations, proof that my years of work had created something genuinely valuable. Yet I faced a new set of challenges I hadn't prepared for. Transforming a personal project into a legitimate business that could partner with major institutions. I called Michael from outside the hospital, barely containing my excitement as I explained what had happened. That's incredible, Alex, he exclaimed. I knew you could do it. The algorithm works, but now I need to figure out the business side quickly, I explained. They want formal agreements, corporate documentation, all sorts of things I don't have. There was a pause before Michael responded. Actually, I might have a solution for that part. Remember my client from last year? The biotech startup founder? Vaguely, I said, trying to recall details from our dinner conversations. Diane Mercer. She sold her company to Pfizer and now works as an advisor for healthcare startups. I helped with her environmental impact case, and she said if I ever needed anything. He trailed off. This might be the time to call in that favor. For the first time in years, I felt the pieces aligning. The technical validation from respected physicians, the potential connection to an experienced biotech entrepreneur, the upcoming summit where I could showcase these results. Set up the meeting, I told Michael, as soon as possible. As I navigated the crowded subway back to our apartment, I couldn't help but imagine Richard's reaction if he could see what was happening. My little hobby was about to become very real, and the first people to recognize its value were leading physicians at one of the country's most prestigious hospitals. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a turning point. Neurotech was no longer just an algorithm. It was becoming a genuine healthcare innovation with clinical validation. Now I needed to transform it into a proper company that could bring this technology to patients who needed it. What I didn't realize then was that this validation would set in motion events that would reshape my life in ways I couldn't have imagined, and eventually lead to that sweet moment when Richard would stand speechless in my office, staring at a valuation that proved just how wrong he had been. Diane Mercer agreed to meet us for breakfast 2 days later at a quiet cafe near Union Square. Michael had prepared me for her direct approach, but I was still taken aback when she cut straight to business before our coffee had even arrived. "So you've built a predictive algorithm for treatment outcomes, got preliminary validation from Memorial, and now you need to transform a personal project into an actual company," she summarized after our brief introductions. "Let's see what you're working with." I handed her a tablet with my presentation slides, technical documentation, and the preliminary results from Dr. Patel's evaluation. Diane reviewed the materials with practiced efficiency, occasionally asking pointed questions about methodologies and performance metrics. "Your technical work is impressive," she said finally, setting down the tablet. "But you have a classic founder problem. You've focused entirely on product development with zero attention to business infrastructure." "That's why we're here," I admitted. She nodded briskly. "At minimum, you need proper incorporation, intellectual property protection, a business plan with clear monetization strategy, and governance documentation for potential partnerships." She tapped her manicured nails on the table. "None of that happens overnight, and your biotech summit presentation is in 5 days. My stomach sank. "So it's too late?" I didn't say that. Diane smiled for the first time. "I said it doesn't happen overnight, unless you have someone who's done it dozens of times before. My consulting fee is typically $300 per hour with a 20-hour minimum engagement. However," she glanced at Michael, "considering what you did for me with that EPA situation, I'm willing to work on a deferred payment basis." "Meaning?" I asked. "I'll help you set up the essential business infrastructure immediately. You'll pay my fees from your first funding round or revenue, whichever comes first." She raised a finger before I could respond. "But I want 5% equity in Neurotech as part of the arrangement." 5% felt significant for consulting services, but I recognized the value she brought. Not just expertise, but immediate legitimacy and connections. "I'd need to review the terms formally," I said, trying to channel the business acumen I was clearly lacking. Diane laughed. "Good answer. Never agree to equity terms without proper documentation." She pulled out her phone. "I'll have my lawyer draft an agreement today. Meanwhile, let's discuss your summit presentation. What's your pitch strategy?" I explained my plan to focus on the algorithm's technical capabilities and clinical validation results. Diane shook her head. "You're thinking like a researcher, not a founder. Investors don't fund technology. They fund solutions to valuable problems. What's the actual market need you're addressing?" This perspective shift forced me to reconsider my entire approach. For years, I'd thought of Neurotech primarily as a technical achievement. Now I needed to articulate its value in business terms. Healthcare providers struggle with treatment decisions for complex conditions because standard protocols don't account for individual patient variations. I began slowly. This leads to ineffective treatments, extended hospitalizations, and higher costs. My algorithm predicts individual treatment responses with significantly higher accuracy than current methods, potentially saving billions in healthcare expenditures while improving patient outcomes. Diane nodded approvingly. "That's your opening slide. Now we need to quantify the market size, demonstrate your competitive advantage, and outline a clear commercialization pathway." We spent the next 3 hours restructuring my entire presentation. By the time we left the cafe, I had a completely different approach to the summit. One focused on neurotech as a business solving a valuable healthcare problem, not just an interesting technical project. "I'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. at my office," Diane said as we parted. "Bring all your technical documentation, any existing business registrations, and be prepared for a very long day. We have a lot to accomplish before the summit." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Diane's office in a sleek midtown building became our command center. Her team of lawyers, accountants, and business consultants transformed Neurotech from a registered name into a proper Delaware C corporation with comprehensive governance documents, intellectual property protections, and a detailed business plan. I signed countless documents, completed paperwork I barely understood, and tried to absorb the crash course in business fundamentals that Diane provided between meetings. "Your algorithm code needs proper documentation and IP protection," she instructed while reviewing my technical files. "And we need to formalize your relationship with Memorial immediately. They've validated your technology, but without proper agreements, they could potentially claim partial ownership." I worked with Diane's IP attorney to document every aspect of my algorithm development process, proving independent creation and establishing clear ownership. Meanwhile, Michael collaborated with the firm's healthcare specialist to draft potential research collaboration agreements for Dr. Patel and her team. "This is costing a fortune," I whispered to Michael on our third day, watching Diane's team in action. "The deferred fees are going to be massive." "It would cost even more to get this wrong," he replied. "Think of it as the price of doing this properly." He was right, of course. Every document, every legal structure, every business strategy was building the foundation Neurotech would need to grow beyond my personal project into a legitimate healthcare technology company. On the fourth day, Diane presented me with a comprehensive investor deck, 30 precisely crafted slides that transformed my technical work into a compelling business opportunity. "Your summit presentation should be a condensed version of this," she explained. 10 slides maximum, focused on the problem, your solution, validation results, market opportunity, and specific tasks. "Asks?" I questioned. "What you want from potential investors or partners. In your case, we're positioning for a seed round of $2 million to finance full clinical validation studies and initial commercialization efforts." $2 million. The figure made me dizzy. Just weeks ago, I had been hesitating over Richard's $50,000 offer, and now we were crafting a pitch for 40 times that amount. "Is that realistic?" I asked hesitantly. Diane's expression was serious. "With your preliminary validation from Memorial's physicians, your technical background, and the market potential, yes. Healthcare AI with demonstrable clinical applications is extremely hot right now. But," she added pointedly, "everything depends on your performance at the summit. That's your moment to show you're not just a brilliant engineer, but a founder worthy of investment." The night before the summit, I practiced my presentation for the 20th time in our apartment, while Michael and Diane provided feedback. We had stripped away technical jargon, refined key messages, and rehearsed potential investor questions until I could answer them in my sleep. "Remember," Diane said as she prepared to leave, "you're no longer just Alexandra Chen, algorithm developer. Tomorrow, you're Alexandra Chen, CEO of Neurotech Innovations, a healthcare AI company positioned to transform treatment planning for complex medical conditions." After she left, Michael found me staring at my presentation notes, overwhelmed by the transformation of the past week. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "Not second thoughts exactly. Just, this is happening so fast. A week ago, I was worried about hardware failures. Now I'm preparing to ask for millions in investment." I looked up at him. "What if I'm not ready for this?" Michael sat beside me. "You built an algorithm sophisticated enough to impress some of the country's top physicians. The technology was always ready. Maybe the question isn't whether you're ready to be a CEO, but whether you're willing to become one to get your work to the patients who need it. His framing shifted something, in my perspective. This wasn't about me proving Richard wrong or vindicating my career choices. It was about bringing a valuable healthcare innovation to the people it could help. I'm willing, I said, with newfound conviction. Not just willing, I'm determined. As I finally fell asleep that night, I realized that regardless of what happened at the summit tomorrow, Neurotech had already transformed from a personal project into something much bigger. I was no longer building in isolation. I had advisors, potential institutional partners, and a clear path forward. The foundation was laid. Tomorrow would determine whether we could build upon it. The morning of the biotech summit arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. The convention center buzzed with activity, healthcare executives in tailored suits, clinical researchers presenting posters, and investors scanning badges for promising opportunities. "Remember, you belong here," Diane murmured as we entered. "Your technology has been validated by Memorial's physicians. That puts you ahead of 90% of the presenters today." She had insisted I dress the part. A tailored charcoal suit that cost more than I'd typically spend on clothes in 6 months. Now part of my deferred payment arrangement with her firm. Michael, equally sharp in his best courtroom attire, squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Let's do a quick walkthrough of the presentation room," Diane suggested. "Get comfortable with the space before people arrive." The Emerging Innovations track was assigned to a medium-sized meeting room with seating for about 150 people. A stage at the front held a podium, presentation screen, and small table with water pitchers. As I familiarized myself with the setup, I spotted Dr. Patel entering with 2 colleagues. "You came," I said, genuinely surprised. Hospital physicians rarely attended industry events unless they were speaking. "Of course," she replied. "I want to see how you present our validation results. And," she added with a small smile, "I'm curious to see the business vision for this algorithm. I've been monitoring your activity in our computing environment. You've made impressive refinements this week." Diane immediately introduced herself, steering the conversation toward potential research collaboration structures. As they discussed institutional partnership models, I scanned the gradually filling room. 5 minutes before my scheduled time, I noticed a familiar figure entering, Dr. Liu, my former professor whose keynote was scheduled for later that afternoon. She caught my eye and nodded in recognition. Having multiple respected figures in the audience added pressure, but also legitimacy. I took deep breaths, reviewing my opening points as the session moderator called the room to order. "Our next presenter is Alexandra Chen, CEO of Neurotech Innovations, discussing AI-driven predictive modeling for personalized treatment planning," the moderator announced. As I took the stage, I forced myself to move deliberately, channeling the confidence Diane had coached me to project. I began with the problem statement we had crafted. The billions wasted on ineffective treatments because standard protocols couldn't account for individual patient variations. Neurotech's proprietary neural network algorithm changes this paradigm. I continued, advancing to slides showing our validation results. In clinical evaluation with Memorial University Hospital, our system predicted treatment outcomes with 94% accuracy across complex autoimmune cases, significantly outperforming standard clinical assessment methods. I noticed several attendees sitting straighter, their attention sharpening. One woman in the 3rd row began taking detailed notes. For 8 carefully rehearsed minutes, I outlined Neurotech's approach, validation results, market opportunity, and implementation pathway. I concluded with our specific ask: seed funding of $2 million to finance expanded clinical validation and initial market entry. "We're not just building another healthcare algorithm," I said in closing. "We're creating a decision support system that could fundamentally transform treatment planning, reducing healthcare costs while significantly improving patient outcomes." Neurotech sits at the intersection of AI innovation and clinical necessity, poised to address a multi-billion-dollar inefficiency in our healthcare system. The Q&A session that followed was intense but energizing. Questions came rapidly, focusing on our validation methodology, scaling strategy, and regulatory pathway. Dr. Patel's presence proved invaluable as she validated our preliminary results from a clinical perspective. When the session ended, I expected the usual polite applause before attendees rushed to the next presentation. Instead, a small crowd formed at the stage. Business cards appeared, and I found myself fielding questions from people who hadn't had a chance to speak during the formal Q&A. "That went better than expected," Diane said when we finally extracted ourselves. "The real work happens at the networking reception tonight. Several investors indicated interest. They'll be looking for you." The afternoon passed in a blur of panel discussions and presentations. I reconnected with Dr. Liu, who introduced me to colleagues from the Broad Institute. Diane orchestrated strategic introductions to investors she knew, positioning me perfectly for each conversation. "Don't commit to anything tonight," she advised as we prepared for the evening reception. "Take business cards, express appreciation for interest, but defer all specific discussions to follow-up meetings. We want to create competition for this round." The reception was held in the convention center's grand ballroom, with stations of appetizers and open bars positioned throughout. Within minutes of entering, I was approached by a woman I recognized from my presentation. Lisa Cheng, Helix Ventures. She introduced herself. "Your presentation was compelling. I'd like to learn more about your clinical validation methodology when you have time." Before I could respond, another attendee joined us. A tall man with a Silicon Valley casual vibe despite his expensive suit. "Kevin Barnes, MedTech Partners." "Alexandra, your approach to predictive modeling is fascinating. Have you considered applications beyond autoimmune conditions?" Throughout the evening, more investors and industry executives sought me out. Michael remained close, occasionally rescuing me when conversations ran too long. Diane worked the room with practiced efficiency, reinforcing interest in neurotech, while gathering intelligence on which investors might be most suitable. As the reception wound down, Diane pulled me aside with barely contained excitement. "We have 5 serious expressions of interest," she reported. 2 venture capital firms and 3 strategic investors. I've scheduled follow-up meetings with each over the next 2 weeks. "That's amazing," I said, still processing the evening's events. "It's just the beginning," she replied. "But a promising one. Now we need to prepare comprehensive due diligence materials, detailed technical documentation, market analyses, competitive landscape assessments. The real work starts tomorrow." As we left the convention center, Michael's phone rang. He frowned at the screen before answering. "Hello, Richard." My stomach tightened at my father-in-law's name. Michael listened for a moment, then replied with uncharacteristic firmness. "We're actually at a business event right now. Alexandra just presented." "At the Biotech Summit?" "Yes, that's right, for her company." "No, we really can't make it this weekend." "I understand you're disappointed, but this is important. We'll call next week." He hung up with a sigh. "Sunday dinner invitation. Apparently your absence at the last 2 family gatherings has been noted." "What did he say about the summit?" I asked. "He asked if this was still about that computer thing." Michael's imitation of Richard's dismissive tone was spot on. "I think he assumes you're still just tinkering with a hobby project." I should have felt anger or frustration, but instead, I felt something unexpected: pity. Richard's inability to recognize innovation beyond his limited understanding suddenly seemed sad rather than infuriating. "Let him think what he wants," I said. "We know what's happening." The next 2 weeks unfolded at a relentless pace. Diane set up a temporary office for neurotech in her firm's building, where we prepared comprehensive materials for potential investors. Dr. Patel's team agreed to a formal research collaboration, lending additional credibility to our clinical approach. Dr. Liu connected me with a former student who had developed healthcare UI systems, creating potential for additional technical collaboration. Investor meetings began 3 days after the summit. Each followed a similar pattern: technical deep dives with their healthcare specialists, market discussions with their analysts, and finally, partnership terms with their senior partners. After our fourth such meeting, Diane pulled me into her office, closing the door for privacy. "We've received our first term sheet," she announced, sliding a document across her desk. "Helix Ventures is offering $3 million at a $12 million pre-money valuation." I stared at the numbers, struggling to process their meaning. "Is that good?" "It's very good for a pre-revenue healthcare AI company with preliminary validation, but no commercial implementation yet." Diane's expression was serious but pleased. "More importantly, it's a strong opening position. MedTech Partners has indicated they'll deliver terms tomorrow, and Catalyst Health Innovations is expediting their diligence process. So we're creating a competitive situation," I said, recalling her strategy. "Exactly. But we need to be strategic about our response to Helix. We'll acknowledge receipt, express appreciation for their interest, but indicate we're in active discussions with multiple parties." She smiled. "The dance has begun, Alexandra, and you're in a much stronger position than anyone would have predicted 2 weeks ago." That night, as Michael and I walked home from the subway, I found myself laughing suddenly, a release of tension and disbelief. "What's so funny?" he asked. 3 weeks ago, I was panicking over a hard drive crash and trying to decide if we should accept your father's $50,000. Now we're discussing a $3 million investment at a $12 million valuation." I shook my head. "And Richard still thinks I'm playing with a computer thing in my spare time." Michael grinned. "The family barbecue next month is going to be interesting." "Let's not tell them yet," I decided. "I want to see how this plays out first. Besides," I added, "it's oddly liberating having him underestimate what's happening. No expectations, no unsolicited advice, just the space to build something extraordinary while he's not paying attention." As we reached our apartment building, my phone buzzed with an email notification from MedTech Partners. Their term sheet had arrived early: $3.5 million at a $15 million valuation. With additional strategic support for regulatory pathways, the momentum was building faster than I could have imagined, each development creating new opportunities and opening doors that had seemed permanently closed just months before. My little hobby was rapidly becoming a serious healthcare innovation company, backed by experienced investors who recognized its potential value. And through it all, Richard remained blissfully unaware that his dismissive attitude had only strengthened my resolve to succeed, a resolution that was now bearing fruit beyond anything I had dared to hope. 3 months after the biotech summit, on a crisp autumn morning, I found myself standing in front of a glass office building in Cambridge's Kendall Square, the new headquarters of Neurotech Innovations. Our name was displayed prominently in the lobby directory, alongside established biotech firms and research institutions. It still seems surreal. The funding round had closed 6 weeks earlier, with MedTech Partners leading a $4.2 million seed investment at a final valuation of $17 million. Their improved offer had come after a third term sheet from Catalyst Health. Innovations created the competitive situation Diane had strategically orchestrated. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where our modest but professional office space housed a team that had grown from just me to 7 full-time employees: 2 AI engineers, a clinical data specialist, a regulatory affairs expert, a business development lead, an office manager, and myself as CEO. We also had consulting arrangements with several clinical advisors, including Dr. Patel, who had taken a formal position on our scientific advisory board. "Morning, Alexandra," called Jamie, our office manager, as I entered. "The team's gathering in the conference room for the weekly update in 15 minutes. And Dr. Nakamura from Tokyo University Hospital sent over the initial results from their validation testing. Looks promising. Thanks, Jamie. I'll review them before the meeting. In my private office, another novelty that still felt strange, I set down my bag and took a moment to absorb the transformation of the past months. My desk held framed photos of Michael and me at the funding closing dinner, alongside a small memento Diane had given me, a lucite cube containing the remnants of my crashed hard drive, engraved with the words, "From obstacles rise opportunities." I opened my laptop to review Dr. Nakamura's preliminary findings. Our international validation studies were expanding the algorithm's proven efficacy across different patient populations, a critical step toward regulatory approval and eventual commercialization. As the data loaded, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Just 6 months ago, I had been working from a makeshift office in our apartment closet, defending my hobby against Richard's derision, and struggling to run basic simulations on consumer-grade hardware. Now I led a funded healthcare AI company, with international research collaborations and a clear path to market. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Just landed. Dinner tonight to celebrate? I have news." Michael had been in Chicago for 3 days, interviewing with environmental law firms there. With Neurotech now established in Cambridge, we had decided to relocate from New York. My company needed me here, close to our investors, research partners at Harvard and MIT, and the vibrant biotech ecosystem of Kendall Square. Michael, supportive as always, had begun exploring opportunities to transfer his legal career. "Definitely dinner," I replied. "Can't wait to hear. 7 p.m. at Catalyst?" As I prepared for the team meeting, gathering my notes on our development roadmap and regulatory strategy, I was struck by how naturally I had grown into this leadership role. The technical aspects had always been my strength, but the business dimensions, strategic planning, team management, investor relations, had initially seemed foreign territory. Now, with Diane's mentorship and daily practical experience, I was finding my voice as a CEO. The weekly team meeting was productive, with progress reports from each department and spirited discussion of our clinical validation approach. I felt a surge of pride watching my small but talented team tackle complex challenges with creativity and dedication. These weren't just employees. They were believers in Neurotech's mission to transform healthcare through precision prediction. After the meeting, our business development lead, Sophia, asked to speak privately. "I just got off a call with Merck's innovation team," she reported, barely containing her excitement. "They're interested in exploring a strategic partnership for applying our algorithm to their immunotherapy clinical trials. This could be huge, Alexandra." It was indeed significant. Major pharmaceutical partnerships could accelerate our growth and provide additional validation for our approach. I made notes as Sophia detailed their initial proposal, already mapping out potential negotiation points in my mind. "Set up a preliminary discussion," I decided. "But let's involve Diane. This type of partnership agreement will have complex IP implications we need to navigate carefully." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of development, reviews, investor updates, and strategic planning. By evening, I was mentally exhausted but energized by our progress. I walked the few blocks to Catalyst, a trendy restaurant popular with the biotech crowd, arriving early to secure a quiet corner table. Michael arrived looking simultaneously, tired from travel and animated with news. After ordering, he couldn't contain himself any longer. "I got an offer," he announced. "Ellison Environmental Law, senior associate position, fast track to partner consideration, and they're doing groundbreaking work on corporate environmental accountability." "That's wonderful." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Is that what you want?" "It's better than what I expected to find," he admitted. "The work is meaningful, the team is impressive, and the compensation is actually an improvement over New York." He hesitated. "But it means committing to Cambridge, long term. Are you sure Neurotech is staying here?" "This is where we need to be," I confirmed, The ecosystem, the talent pool, the proximity to research institutions, it's all ideal for our growth phase. He nodded, visibly relieved. Then I'll accept. We should start looking for a place to buy, instead of renting. With your company's valuation and my new salary, we might actually afford something decent even in this market. The mention of buying a home triggered an unexpected wave of emotion. Just months ago, we had been counting pennies, declining Richard's money out of principle, uncertain if my work would ever lead anywhere concrete. Now we were discussing real estate purchases in one of the country's most expensive markets as a realistic possibility. We've come so far, I said softly. Sometimes I can't believe how quickly everything has changed. You've come so far, Michael corrected gently. This is all happening because you refuse to give up on your vision, even when my father, and practically everyone else, told you it was just a hobby. As we enjoyed our meal, discussing Cambridge neighborhoods, and imagining our new life together, I felt a profound sense of vindication. Not the petty satisfaction of proving Richard wrong, though that element certainly existed, but the deeper validation of having trusted my own judgment against conventional wisdom. Have you told your parents about any of this? I asked, realizing we hadn't discussed Richard and Diane with everything else happening. Michael looked slightly guilty. Not really. They know we're relocating for your work, but I haven't gone into details about Neurotech's funding or growth. I thought maybe you'd want to share that news yourself, when you're ready. I considered this. Part of me wanted to call Richard immediately, to force him to acknowledge how wrong he had been. But another part, the part that had matured through this entrepreneurial journey, recognized that such vindication would be hollow. Let's wait, I decided. There will be a right moment. Maybe when we have regulatory approval, or our first commercial implementation, some milestones that even he can't dismiss. Later that night, in our temporary corporate apartment, I couldn't sleep despite my exhaustion. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Michael, and sat by the window overlooking the Charles River. Cambridge's lights reflected on the water, creating a scene both peaceful and vibrant with possibility. I opened my laptop and pulled up Neurotech's financial projections. Our seed funding provided a runway for approximately 18 months, by which time we aimed to have completed expanded clinical validation, secured regulatory clearance for our initial applications, and established our first commercial partnerships. If successful, our next funding round would likely value the company at $50–70 million, potentially much more if pharmaceutical partnerships materialized. From Richard's little hobby to a multi-million-dollar healthcare innovation company, in less than a year, the trajectory was staggering when viewed objectively. Yet material success wasn't what moved me most as I sat there in the quiet night. It was the realization that my algorithm would soon help real patients, people with complex conditions, who might receive more effective treatments because of technology I had created. The potential impact stretched far beyond financial returns or personal vindication. In that moment of reflection, I understood that Neurotech had transformed me as much as I had built it. The insecure engineer fighting for recognition had become a confident CEO leading a team toward meaningful healthcare innovation. The journey wasn't just about proving Richard wrong. It was about becoming someone who no longer needed his approval or validation. As dawn began to lighten the sky over Boston, I made a promise to myself. Neurotech's success would be measured not by its valuation or by Richard's eventual recognition, but by the lives it improved through better healthcare decisions. That was the true value of my small investment, a value that transcended any dollar figure, even one as impressive as $70 million. 18 months after our move to Cambridge, Neurotech was thriving beyond our most optimistic projections. Our clinical validation studies had produced compelling results across multiple hospital systems. Our regulatory submissions were progressing smoothly, and our first commercial partnerships with 2 pharmaceutical companies were generating initial revenue through licensing agreements. The team had grown to 23 employees occupying an entire floor of our building. We'd expanded our technical capabilities, built a robust data infrastructure, and developed an intuitive clinical interface that physicians actually enjoyed using, a rare achievement in healthcare technology. On a crisp October morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, armed with coffee and determination. Our Series A funding round was set to close in 3 weeks, with term sheets from 5 major venture capital firms valuing Neurotech at $68 million, a quadrupling of our seed valuation. "Alexandra, you're in early," Jamie greeted me, now our office director managing a small administrative team. "The board packet for Friday's meeting is on your desk for review, and Dr. Kwan called from UCSF. Their oncology department wants to accelerate implementation of our platform." "Thanks, Jamie. Any word from Diane?" "She's flying in this afternoon for pre-board preparations." "Oh, and your father-in-law called yesterday when you were in the strategy session. He wouldn't leave a message, just said it was important you call him back." I paused at this unexpected development. Richard rarely called me directly, typically communicating through Michael. We'd seen Richard and his wife only twice since moving to Cambridge, during brief trips back to New York. Each time he had asked perfunctory questions about my computer business before changing the subject, clearly uninterested in details. "Did he say what it was about?" I asked. "Just that it was time-sensitive." He seemed agitated. Curious, but not concerned, I headed to my office to handle more pressing matters. Neurotech's pre-Series A board meeting would be our last before welcoming new investor representatives, and the agenda was packed with critical decisions about our growth strategy, international expansion, and product development roadmap. Mid-morning, between calls with our regulatory consultants and a review of clinical implementation timelines, I finally returned Richard's call. He answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "Alexandra." His tone was unusually formal. "Thank you for calling back. Jamie said it was urgent. Is everything all right?" "Not exactly." He cleared his throat. "I need to discuss a business opportunity with you. A significant one." This was unexpected. In all our years of knowing each other, Richard had never approached me about business matters, consistently treating my work as inconsequential. "What kind of opportunity?" I asked cautiously. "Westford Medical Technologies is looking to acquire healthcare AI companies with proven clinical applications. Their CEO is an old friend from business school." His voice took on an unmistakable note of self-importance. "I mentioned your little company, and he expressed interest in looking at an acquisition." I nearly dropped my phone. After years of dismissing my work, Richard was now trying to broker an acquisition deal as if doing me a favor. "I'm sure you'd want to maximize your exit opportunity," he continued. "Startups like yours typically don't succeed independently. Being acquired by an established player would secure the technology's future and provide you with a comfortable payout." I took a deep breath, weighing my response carefully. "I appreciate you thinking of us, Richard, but Neurotech isn't looking for acquisition offers at this time. We're actually closing our Series A funding round in 3 weeks." "Series A?" He sounded genuinely surprised. "How much are you raising?" $15 million at a $68 million pre-money valuation, I replied, unable to keep a note of pride from my voice. "We have term sheets from 5 leading healthcare investment firms." Silence stretched across the line. I could almost hear him recalculating his understanding of my little hobby. $68 million, he finally managed. "That's substantial. It reflects our clinical validation results, commercial traction, and intellectual property portfolio," I explained, adopting the matter-of-fact tone I used in investor presentations. "But as I said, we're not pursuing acquisition options currently. Our growth trajectory and strategic plan focus on building independent value." "I see." Richard's voice had lost its condescending edge. "Perhaps I misunderstood the nature of your company. My contact at Westford indicated they might offer up to $50 million for the right acquisition target. Please thank them for their interest. but that would significantly undervalue Neurotech at this stage. I glanced at my watch, noting my next meeting was minutes away. I need to go, Richard. We have our pre-board strategy session this afternoon. Board? He repeated, seemingly stuck on each new revelation. Yes, our board of directors. We're restructuring it following the Series A closing. I paused, then added, I really do appreciate the referral, though. It's good to have visibility with companies, like Westford, even if the timing isn't right for acquisition talks. After ending the call, I sat for a moment processing what had just happened. Richard had finally recognized Neurotech's value, but only because an old friend from business school had expressed interest. Even in acknowledgement, he had attempted to position himself as the gatekeeper of opportunity, the wise elder guiding my exit strategy. I was still contemplating this interaction when Diane arrived that afternoon, impeccably dressed and radiating her characteristic efficiency. You seem distracted, she observed as we reviewed board materials in my office. Problem with the Merck implementation? I shared my conversation with Richard, watching her expression shift from surprise to amusement. Classic, she said, shaking her head. The moment he realizes your company has actual value, he tries to insert himself into the equation. She studied me curiously. How did it feel, telling him about the valuation? Strangely anticlimactic, I admitted. I've spent years imagining the moment he'd recognize the value of what I've built. But when it finally happened, I shrugged. It just didn't matter as much as I thought it would. That's because you've outgrown his validation, Diane said, matter-of-factly. Success is the best revenge, but it also makes revenge seem irrelevant. She was right. The vindication I'd once craved had been rendered almost meaningless by Neurotech's actual achievements. The real satisfaction came from our clinical impact, not Richard's belated recognition. Our discussion was interrupted by an urgent email from our lead investor. The final term sheet had arrived with unexpected changes to the governance provisions. Changes that could potentially limit my control over Neurotech's strategic direction. This is a classic pre-closing power move, Diane said, reviewing the document with narrowed eyes. They're testing your resolve, seeing if you'll accept diminished authority in exchange for their capital. What do we do? I asked, concerned. By provisions that would require investor approval for key development decisions. We renegotiate from a position of strength, she replied. We have multiple interested firms. If Highland won't accept reasonable governance terms, we go with Benchmark, or Sequoia. But as we prepared our response strategy, another email arrived. This one from Westford Medical Technologies, addressed directly to me rather than through Richard. Their corporate development team requested a meeting to discuss potential strategic partnerships or acquisition opportunities. Word travels fast, Diane mused. Looks like your father-in-law's friend made some calls. Should we take the meeting? I asked, uncertain about engaging with acquisition discussions while finalizing our funding round. Diane considered this thoughtfully. Actually, yes, but not for the reason they think. Having an acquisition offer, even one we intend to decline, strengthens our negotiating position with investors. It creates FOMO and demonstrates independent validation of our value. Using one unwanted offer to improve another, I observed with growing appreciation for the strategic chess game of corporate dealings. Exactly. Business is rarely about the deal in front of you. It's about how that deal affects all your other options. Diane smiled. Schedule the meeting, but after our board session. We'll inform our investors about the unexpected acquisition, interest we've received, implying we're considering all strategic options. As we prepared for the board meeting, finalizing presentations and strategic recommendations, I realized that this moment represented the final challenge in my transformation from engineer to CEO. The technical challenges of building Neurotech had given way to sophisticated business negotiations where psychology and strategy mattered as much as metrics and projections. Richard's unexpected call had inadvertently created a new opportunity, not the one he intended, but one that might strengthen our position as we completed this crucial funding round. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had once dismissed my work as a hobby was now indirectly helping secure its future. The next 3 weeks would determine Neurotech's trajectory for years to come, whether we maintained the independence and vision I valued or compromised for capital or acquisition. The stakes were higher than ever, but for the first time, I felt fully prepared for the business battles ahead. The 3 weeks leading up to our Series A closing were a masterclass in strategic negotiation. Using Westford's acquisition interest as leverage, Diane and I successfully pushed back against the problematic governance provisions in Highland Capital's term sheet. The competition among our potential investors intensified, leading to improved terms and, ultimately, a higher valuation. By the time we gathered for the closing dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Charles River, Neurotech's pre-money valuation had settled at $72 million, a figure that still seemed surreal to me. The $16.5 million investment would fuel our expansion into international markets, advance our regulatory approvals, and accelerate product development across additional medical specialties. To Neurotech Innovations, toasted Marcus Weber, Highland's managing partner who would be joining our board. And to Alexandra Chen, whose vision and tenacity have created a company poised to transform healthcare decision-making. As glasses clinked around the table, I caught Michael's eye across the room. He smiled with quiet pride, having witnessed every step of this improbable journey. From our struggle to pay rent while I coded in a closet to this moment of triumph with some of healthcare technology's most influential investors, he had never wavered in his belief that this day would come. After dinner, as investors and team members mingled over dessert and coffee, Marcus pulled me aside. "I want you to know something, Alexandra," he said, his usual brisk manner softened by the occasion. "We looked at 17 AI healthcare companies this quarter. What set Neurotech apart wasn't just your technology. It was your clarity of purpose. You built this to solve a real clinical problem, not to chase investor capital." His comment touched on something fundamental about our success. Neurotech hadn't been created to attract funding or generate headlines. It had emerged from a genuine desire to improve treatment decisions for patients with complex conditions. That authentic mission had attracted not only investors, but also the talented team members, clinical partners, and advisors who made our growth possible. The next morning, surprisingly free of a celebration hangover, I arrived at the office early. The funding announcement would be released at 9 a.m., and I wanted a moment of quiet reflection before the day's whirlwind began. Our communication director had prepared press materials highlighting not just the investment, but also our clinical validation results and the healthcare impact of our technology. The story would focus on patient benefits rather than valuation figures, an approach I had insisted on despite investor preference for emphasizing the financial milestone. At 8:45, my phone rang with a New York number I immediately recognized. "Richard," I answered, surprised by his timing. "Good morning, Alexandra." His voice carried an unfamiliar note, something between hesitation and respect. "I've just seen the press release draft that's going out this morning. $72 million? Of course. The investment syndicate included a firm where Richard's golf partner served as a limited partner. News traveled fast in these circles. "Yes, that's the pre-money valuation," I confirmed. "The round closed last night." "I clearly misjudged the scale of what you've built." Each word seemed painfully extracted. "Westford has been calling me daily, pressing for that introduction. I told them it was your decision, of course. We're meeting with them next week," I said, not for acquisition discussions, but to explore potential strategic partnership opportunities. "Their hospital network could accelerate our clinical implementation." "I see." A long pause followed. "Well, congratulations are in order. This is quite an achievement." Thank you, Richard. Another pause. I'm coming to Boston next Thursday for a real estate conference. Perhaps we could meet. I'd like to better understand what Neurotech is doing. Michael mentions it sometimes, but I realize I've never properly engaged with your work. The invitation represented exactly what I had once craved: Richard's undivided attention and genuine interest in my professional achievements. Yet now, it felt almost unnecessary, an afterthought to a journey I had completed without his support or understanding. Thursday would work, I said, surprised by my own emotional detachment. We can have lunch at the office. Our chief medical officer is presenting our latest clinical results that morning. You might find it interesting. After we hung up, I sat quietly processing this subtle but profound shift in our dynamic. Richard was now seeking my time, asking to understand my work, positioning himself as interested in what I had built. The power balance had irrevocably tilted, not because I had demanded recognition, but because the objective reality of Neurotech's success had forced a recalibration of his perception. The press release went out at 9 a.m. sharp. Within hours, my inbox overflowed with congratulatory messages, partnership inquiries, and interview requests. Our website traffic spiked dramatically, and LinkedIn notifications became a constant ping as industry professionals engaged with our announcement. Midday, Michael called from his law firm. Have you seen the Wall Street Journal coverage? They're calling Neurotech Healthcare AI's breakout success story and describing you as a visionary leader bridging technical innovation and clinical application. I laughed at his obvious delight. I've been in meetings all morning. The team set up a press coverage dashboard, but I haven't had time to check it. Well, prepare yourself. Your little hobby is suddenly very public. He paused. Oh, and my mother called. Dad apparently told her about your funding news and your meeting next week. She sounded genuinely impressed and a little confused about how it all happened so suddenly. So suddenly, I repeated, amused by the characterization of a 4-year journey as an overnight success. If only they knew about the crashed hard drive, the borrowed laptop, the nights coding until dawn. Maybe it's time they did, Michael suggested. When Dad visits next week, maybe it's finally the moment to tell the whole story. Thursday arrived. With unusually perfect Boston weather, clear skies, gentle breeze, the kind of fall day that makes New England famous. I had arranged for Richard to attend Dr. Kwan's presentation on our clinical validation results, followed by lunch in our conference room overlooking the Cambridge Innovation District. I greeted him in the lobby, noticing small changes since our last meeting 9 months earlier. He seemed somehow diminished, still impeccably dressed and groomed, but less imposing, less certain in his movements. Impressive offices, he commented as I led him through our workspace. Very professional. I suppressed a smile at his surprise. Had he expected beanbag chairs and ping-pong tables? The stereotypical startup aesthetic had never appealed to me. Neurotech's space was deliberately designed to reflect the seriousness of our healthcare mission. Dr. Kwan's presentation was comprehensive and compelling, showcasing how our algorithm had outperformed standard clinical protocols across multiple specialties and patient populations. Richard sat attentively in the back row, occasionally noting something in a small leather notebook. Watching him absorb information about Neurotech with genuine concentration felt surreal after years of his dismissal. During lunch, served by our office manager in our glass-walled conference room, Richard asked unexpectedly thoughtful questions about our technology, business model, and clinical impact. Gone was the condescending tone that had characterized his previous inquiries about my computer thing. The valuation is obviously impressive, he said as we finished our meal. But I'm more struck by the potential patient impact. If your system performs as demonstrated in Dr. Kwan's presentation, it could significantly improve treatment outcomes for complex cases. That's always been the goal, I replied. The valuation is a means to that end. capital to accelerate development and implementation. Richard nodded slowly, studying me with new eyes. You know, at Thanksgiving 4 years ago, when you refused my check, I thought you were being stubborn and impractical. I remember, I said simply. I was wrong. The admission seemed physically painful for him. Your vision was clearer than mine. I couldn't see past traditional career paths and conventional wisdom. This was the moment I had once imagined would bring vindication and satisfaction. Richard explicitly acknowledging how wrong he had been. Yet, sitting across from him now, successful beyond what either of us had imagined possible, I felt neither triumph nor resentment, just a quiet recognition of how far we had both come. Would you like to see the algorithm in action? I offered, changing the subject to ease his discomfort. Our development team has set up a demonstration using anonymized patient cases. As I led him through our office toward the development area, Richard paused by the wall displaying our team photos, awards, and framed press coverage. $70 million, he murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. From an idea, everyone, dismiss this. It's quite a story, Alexandra. In that moment, watching my once dismissive father-in-law stand humbled before the evidence of Neurotech's success, I recognized that the full circle had finally been completed. The journey that began with his ridicule of my small investment had culminated not just in financial validation, but in a fundamental shift in how he, and the world, perceived my work and worth. What had started as a personal quest to prove him wrong had evolved into something far more meaningful. Building a company that could genuinely improve healthcare outcomes while creating opportunities for a talented team who shared that vision. The true value of my investment wasn't measured in the $70 million valuation, but in the impact it would have on countless patients whose treatments would be optimized by our technology. And Richard, standing before the physical evidence of that journey, finally understood what I had known all along, that some investments, no matter how small they might initially appear, carry the potential to transform not just industries, but lives. The weeks following our funding announcement brought a whirlwind of activity: media interviews, industry conference invitations, and a surge of partnership inquiries that kept our business development team working overtime. Neurotech had suddenly become the healthcare AI company everyone wanted to know, partner with, or invest in. This newfound attention created both opportunities and challenges. While the visibility accelerated our hospital adoption conversations, it also brought scrutiny from competitors and heightened expectations from our investors. Leading a high-profile company required a different approach than building a scrappy startup. 6 weeks after Richard's visit, Michael and I finally found time for a weekend getaway to a small coastal inn in Maine. Away from the constant demands of Neurotech and Michael's environmental law cases, we had our first real chance to reflect on everything that had transpired. I still can't believe my father actually admitted he was wrong, Michael said as we walked along a windswept beach. In 40 years, I've never heard those words from him. It wasn't easy for him, I acknowledged. But seeing the evidence with his own eyes, the office, the team, Dr. Kwan's presentation, left him little choice. Reality became undeniable. Michael picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his hand before skipping it across the waves. You know what's strange? He's been calling me regularly to discuss Neurotech's progress, asking questions about the technology, your expansion plans, even the clinical implementation details. He's genuinely interested. This revelation surprised me. What does he say? Mostly he listens, Michael replied. But last week, he mentioned that he's been following healthcare AI investment trends. He said he's adjusting his perspective on emerging technologies. Coming from my father, that's practically a revolutionary statement. I smiled at the thought of Richard, at 67, reconsidering his rigid views on technology and innovation. His generation had built careers in established industries with predictable trajectories. The idea that a computer thing could create greater value than traditional business models represented a fundamental challenge to his worldview. I think meeting your team made the difference, Michael continued. Seeing actual doctors and engineers working together, understanding the clinical impact, it made neurotech real to him in a way that valuation figures couldn't. That evening, as we sat by a fire overlooking the ocean, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The crashed hard drive that nearly derailed everything. Dr. Patel's leap of faith in providing those first critical patient cases. Diane's strategic guidance that transformed a promising algorithm into a viable business. Each challenge, each supporter, each small victory had been essential steps toward neurotech's current success. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked. Noticing my contemplative mood. "All the moments where this could have gone differently," I replied. "If you hadn't encouraged me to approach Dr. Patel directly, instead of continuing to send cold emails to research departments. If Raj hadn't rescued our data after the crash. If Diane hadn't taken a chance on us when we couldn't pay her fees up front. If my father's dismissiveness hadn't fueled your determination to prove him wrong," Michael added with a knowing smile. I laughed, acknowledging the irony. True, his skepticism was probably the most consistent motivation in those early days. Every dismissive comment became another reason to make neurotech succeed. And now? Now? I considered the question seriously. Now I realize his opinion was never actually relevant to what we were building. The algorithm works or it doesn't. The technology improves patient outcomes or it doesn't. Those realities exist independently of anyone's belief or disbelief. Michael nodded. That's the wisdom in all this, isn't it? Success isn't about proving critics wrong. It's about being right about what matters. His simple articulation captured exactly what I had come to understand through neurotech's journey. The validation I had once craved from Richard now seemed almost trivial compared to the validation we'd received from physicians adopting our technology, from patients benefiting from better treatment decisions, from a team devoted to our mission. Aye. "Wonder sometimes," I said, watching the moonlight on the water. "What would have happened if we had taken his money that Thanksgiving? The $50,000 check he offered." "You mean the check that would have entitled him to opinions about everything we did afterward?" Michael shook his head. "It would have changed everything, and not for the better." He was right. That money would have come with invisible strings, altered dynamics, and a perpetual obligation to justify decisions to someone who fundamentally didn't understand our vision. Refusing it had been a pivotal choice, one that forced us to find our own path forward and ultimately led to greater independence and success. The next morning, over breakfast at the inn, I received an unexpected email from Richard. The subject line read simply, "Investment opportunity?" Curious, I opened it to find a brief message. "Alexandra, a colleague has approached me about a healthcare technology fund he's establishing. Given your expertise and neurotech's success, would you be willing to advise on potential investments in this sector? Your perspective would be valuable." Richard, I showed the email to Michael, who read it with raised eyebrows. "Is he asking for your professional advice? As in, acknowledging your expertise?" "Appears so," I said, still processing this reversal of roles. Richard, who had once dismissed my judgment about my own field, was now seeking my guidance on investment decisions. "Are you going to do it?" Michael asked. I considered the question. Part of me wanted to decline, to maintain the professional distance I'd established. But another part recognized an opportunity for a different kind of relationship with my father-in-law. One based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical judgment. "I think I will," I decided. Within appropriate boundaries. It might be interesting to engage with him as a professional peer rather than just his son's wife with a hobby. As we packed to return to Cambridge, I reflected on how completely the dynamic had shifted. I had once desperately sought Richard's approval, then actively resented his dismissal, then worked to prove him wrong. Now I found myself in a position to offer guidance in an area where he acknowledged my superior expertise. The journey had come full circle, but more importantly, it had taught me something essential about validation and worth. True confidence doesn't come from external recognition, not from investors, not from the press, not even from once skeptical family members. It comes from knowing the value of what you've built, understanding its impact, and recognizing your own growth through the building process. Neurotech had succeeded not because I needed to prove Richard wrong, but because the technology addressed a genuine need in healthcare. That purpose, not personality, not pride, not vindication, had been the true north that guided every decision through the challenges and opportunities along the way. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable wisdom gained from this entire journey. 2 years after our Series A funding, I stood at the podium of the World Healthcare Innovation Summit in London, addressing an audience of physicians, technology leaders, and policymakers. Neurotech's algorithm had received regulatory approval in the United States, the European Union, and Japan, and was being implemented in over 70 hospital systems worldwide. The future of healthcare isn't about replacing human judgment with artificial intelligence, I explained, concluding my keynote presentation. It's about creating tools that enhance clinical decision-making by processing more variables, identifying subtle patterns, and quantifying uncertainty in ways the human mind simply cannot. Our goal has never been to build technology for technology's sake, but to improve patient outcomes through more precise, personalized treatment planning. The applause that followed felt different from earlier in my career, less about personal validation and more about collective recognition of the mission we were advancing. As I stepped away from the podium, I spotted Michael in the audience, his proud smile reflecting the journey we had shared. That evening, at a reception overlooking the Thames, the CEO of one of Europe's largest healthcare systems approached us. "Dr. Chen, your presentation was outstanding," she said. "We've been implementing Neurotech's platform in our oncology department for 6 months now, and the results have been remarkable. Treatment optimization for complex cases has improved significantly." "That's wonderful to hear," I replied, genuinely moved by the real-world impact. "Our clinical implementation team would love to hear more about your experience. We're constantly refining the system based on physician feedback." As we discussed specific case applications, I reflected on how far Neurotech had come from its origins as an algorithm running on a consumer laptop in our New York apartment. Our latest valuation following a Series B round had reached $310 million, with a team now numbering over 100 professionals across 3 countries. The growth had brought new challenges and opportunities. I had transitioned from hands-on coding to strategic leadership, focusing on our long-term vision while building a leadership team that managed day-to-day operations. The change had been necessary but occasionally bittersweet. I sometimes missed the direct connection to the technology that started it all. Later that night, in our hotel room overlooking the city lights, I shared this reflection with Michael. "Spend more time in board meetings and strategic planning sessions than I do working with the actual algorithm now," I admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm still the right person to lead Neurotech into its next phase." Michael considered this thoughtfully. "What would the ideal next phase look like for you?" It was a question I'd been contemplating for months. "I want to ensure the technology reaches patients who need it most, not just those in wealthy hospital systems. I'm thinking about a foundation arm that would provide our platform to underserved communities and developing regions." "That sounds more like expansion than stepping back," Michael observed. "It is," I acknowledged, "but it would reconnect me with the purpose that drove me to create the algorithm in the first place, improving patient outcomes, not just building a valuable company." The next morning, before my panel discussion on ethical AI implementation, in healthcare, I received an email that crystallized this evolving vision. A physician from a rural hospital in Kenya had somehow obtained my contact information and written a passionate plea. Dr. Chen, I've been following Neurotech's work through medical journals. Our hospital serves a population of 350,000 with limited resources and specialists. Your predictive algorithm could fundamentally transform our ability to treat complex cases, particularly those requiring specialized expertise we simply don't have locally. Is there any possibility of making this technology accessible to communities like ours? The message resonated deeply with my emerging thoughts about Neurotech's future. On the flight back to Boston, I drafted a proposal for what would eventually become the Neurotech Global Access Initiative, a program to provide our platform to under-resourced healthcare systems worldwide through a combination of subsidized licensing, philanthropic partnerships, and technical support. 3 months later, our board approved the initiative with $30 million in dedicated funding. I would lead this new division while transitioning my CEO responsibilities to our Chief Operating Officer, a healthcare veteran who had joined us after the Series A. When I called Richard to share this new direction, his reaction surprised me. "It's an excellent strategic move," he said without hesitation. "Expanding into developing markets establishes global presence and builds tremendous goodwill. The commercial applications will follow naturally." I smiled at his businessman's interpretation of what was fundamentally a mission-driven decision. "It's not primarily about market expansion, Richard. It's about fulfilling the purpose behind Neurotech's creation, improving treatment decisions for patients, regardless of geography or economics." "Of course," he replied, then added unexpectedly, "But doing good and building value aren't mutually exclusive, Alexandra. You've proven that repeatedly." Coming from Richard, this represented a profound evolution in thinking. The man who had once measured success solely in traditional financial terms was now acknowledging the value of purpose-driven innovation. 6 weeks later, I found myself in that high-rise office overlooking San Francisco, showing Richard the latest valuation report that valued Neurotech at $70 million more than even our recent Series B round had indicated. A potential strategic partnership with a major global healthcare corporation had triggered a new assessment of our worth, both financially and in terms of patient impact. $70 million, Richard murmured, staring at the document. From an idea I dismissed as a hobby to this. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I was completely wrong, Alexandra. Not just about the financial potential, but about the healthcare impact." His admission brought a sense of closure to the journey we had shared, from dismissive father-in-law and defensive daughter-in-law to something approaching mutual respect. But more meaningful than his acknowledgement was my own recognition that I no longer needed it. My validation came from physicians reporting improved patient outcomes, from team members dedicated to our mission, from knowing that the algorithm, born in our tiny apartment, was now helping patients across the globe receive more effective, personalized treatments. As I look toward Neurotech's future, my vision extends beyond valuation milestones or personal vindication. I see our technology reaching remote clinics in underserved regions, empowering physicians with limited resources to make optimal treatment decisions. I see our research advancing to incorporate genomic data, environmental factors, and social determinants of health into increasingly personalized predictive models. I see collaboration rather than competition driving healthcare innovation forward. The journey from ridiculed small investment to $70 million valuation taught me that the greatest returns aren't measured in dollars but in impact, in growth, in purpose fulfilled. What began as a personal quest to prove a skeptic wrong evolved into something far more meaningful: a mission to transform healthcare decision-making for patients worldwide. And that mission, unlike the validation I once craved, has no ceiling, no final destination, no moment of completion. It stretches forward into a future where technology serves humanity's deepest needs, where innovation bridges resource gaps, and where success is measured in lives improved rather than critics silenced. That is the vision that drives me now. One that my former self, defending her hobby at that Thanksgiving dinner years ago, could barely have imagined but somehow always knew was possible. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.